Welcome to this jazzy panel lunch from the lab. I'm Victoria Moran of Main Street Vegan, and really honored to be leading this discussion, convening this discussion on something that is a more controversial topic than I think a lot of people who are vegan or in the plant-based world would understand. I am joined today by two academics and an artist. I guess we could have called the panel that, and I'll be introducing each of them just very briefly, and they can tell you more about themselves. We'll first be hearing from Glenn Gaudette, PhD. He holds the Kozovich Chair in the Department of Engineering at Boston College. Then we will hear from the artist, from filmmaker Liz Marshall. You know her from her beautiful film, The Ghosts in Our Machine, and she is now also the producer and director of Meet the Future. And Liz is coming to us from Canada, I believe Vancouver today. And then our third panelist is John Sanbonmatsu, PhD. He's Associate Professor of Philosophy at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. So the way this will work is that we're going to have 10 minutes from each of our panelists, and then we're going to have some discussion just among them. And then we'll go to your questions and what you have to add to this really important discussion. So without further ado, Dr. Glenn Gaudette.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. And thank you for the invitation to be part of this exciting panel. Let's see, let me start off by sharing my screen. There we go. Hopefully you can see that there. And so I titled my talk, Growing Meat in the Lab from Spinach. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the work we've been doing and the need for it, and a little bit about really focusing more on the science and how we got here. So my background is in tissue engineering, and so I come at it from a tissue engineering point of view. Why tissue engineering? Well, there's more than 100,000 patients on the organ transplant waiting list at any given time. And this gap between what's needed and what's available continues to grow. And so patients are dying, unfortunately, every day waiting for a transplant. And so tissue engineering has the potential to overcome this by growing new tissues and new organs. And my lab in the past has focused almost exclusively on trying to grow new heart tissue. And so if you look on the right, on the upper panel, hopefully you can see some cells that are actually contracting here. And so you can see some movement. Those there are induced pluripotent cells that have been turned into human heart muscle cells. And we know that because the picture on the bottom, the green staining represents the heart muscle cells. And so we're able to basically take cells from a patient, turn them into contracting heart muscle cells and actually get them to contract. And now we're figuring out how can we turn that into human heart tissue so that we can then hopefully provide a solution for many of these patients that are on the transplant list. So that's my background, and my journey into growing meat in a lab began from some of our work where we used a spinach leaf and we stripped away all the plant cells. And so the movie you see here on the left with the red dye going through the leaf, that's an actual spinach leaf that we took away all the cells from, but we kept that vascular structure in place. And so the vascular structure is really important in terms of a scaffold for growing human heart tissue, but also growing any type of tissue. And so we found that in the spinach leaf. And because of that work, I got invited to give a talk at Cardiff University, and so hence the map. And I flew into London, and rather than taking another flight over to Cardiff, I decided to take the train and stop off at the University of Bath and visit a colleague of mine, Marianne Ellis, whose photo is shown here. And it was during that trip that she told me about her exciting work growing meat in her lab and what she was trying to do. And when I got back to Massachusetts, I read up a little bit on her work and some of the work that was being done at the Good Food Institute by Liz Specht and her colleagues here. And Liz is a phenomenal scientist, and also started reading up and attended some meetings sponsored by New Harvest. And around that same time, Paul Shapiro's book, Clean Meat, had just come out, and he was kind enough to send me a copy of it. And I read through it, and I said to myself, gosh, this is a big problem. And can I actually help? Can I actually make a difference? And what is the problem? The problem is that we're really killing our environment, right? And animal agriculture is one of the significant contributors to that. Of course, we need to feed the world. We need to feed the world without killing it. The world's population, as I'm sure you know, continues to grow. It's expected to grow to 9.7 billion people by 2050. And that's not too far away. Animal agriculture is responsible for 14.5% of the man-made greenhouse gas emissions. In addition, about 70% of all agricultural land is used for farm animals. And so we can, and quite frankly, we have to, for the sake of our future, we have to do better. And so this is where I stepped in and said, gee, can I contribute to this field? And to be able to, think and hopefully contribute to really, helping change our environment for the better was a great opportunity for me. And so I've become more involved in cellular agriculture, or clean meat, or cultured meat, basically growing meat in a lab. And so what does it take to grow it? A lot of things is the bottom line. But I'm going to walk you through some of the science kind of at a higher level. When we talk about growing meat, we can start off with the bioreactors. Think about the bioreactors we're going to grow them in. What does this look like? It's a big vat. I dream that one day, if you go to microbreweries and you see the big stainless steel vats that they have there, one day that they will be full of essentially lab-grown meat, and you can just get your meat that way there instead of having to kill animals to get the meat. So that's essentially a bioreactor. We need to think about how we're going to get oxygen to all the cells that are growing, because as a cell grows, it requires oxygen, and so that means perfusion. We're going to have to filter it. We're going to have to think about how fast we can grow those cells and then differentiate them or turn them into muscle cells. In addition, we want to think about the source of cells. What cells are we going to use? Where are we going to get them from? How fast are they going to proliferate? How are we going to proliferate them? How are we going to turn those cells then into the muscle cells that make up meat? And what about other types of cells? We also want to think about fat cells. And how are we going to combine the fat cells with the meat cells, with the muscle cells? We also want to think about the regulatory industry. And so we've got to be careful here. We've got to make sure that we're producing meat that is not going to harm people when they eat it. And so that's part of the job of the FDA and the USDA. And so we need to make sure that we're working with these agencies. We also got to think about here in the States, the US Congress, but also the state Congresses, state legislative branch, because they can enact policies that will essentially either outlaw lab-grown meat or change it so that it's really not what we intend for it to be. And so we've got to work closely also with our policy officials. When we think about the media or the solution that these cells are grown in, there's a lot of cost associated with that. We talk about growth factors. We can add different things. So the media essentially is the Gatorade that the cells grow in. How much sugar do we need to put in there? What kind of growth factors do we need to include so we can make them grow fast, but then turn into muscle cells? And it's important here, if we're really looking for an eventual solution that is completely animal-free, other than the starting cells, how do we get away from serum? Serum's currently used in most cases to grow cells. And so that comes from animals. And so can we get rid of the serum? And then our work is really focused mostly on the scaffolds. What are we going to grow this meat on? Our body is made up of cells that are anchored essentially to what's called an extracellular matrix. And so a scaffold. We can think about the cost. We can think about whether these scaffolds should have a vascular network, kind of like I just showed earlier. Are they edible scaffolds, or do we degrade them afterwards? And so these are some of the science, and it's beyond science, but some of the issues that we're grappling with. Our work in this area is really focused on growing initially bovine cells on decellularized plants and decellularized spinach. Our thought is we take a small biopsy from a cow, and then we sew the cow back up, and we take a very tiny biopsy, less than the size of a dime, and from that we can grow up lots and lots of cells, enough to produce, pounds and pounds of meat. And once we grow those cells, though, in order for them to grow, they want to adhere to something. They want to anchor onto something. That's where the scaffold comes in. And so in our case, we're using decellularized spinach. So they anchor onto the spinach substrate, and then they grow. And so we've shown, and we just published this paper here, and what you can see on the left here, this long line essentially is a cow muscle cell that was grown from a small biopsy, a small chunk of muscle from a cow. And let's see, get this. On the right here, you can see the end of it actually contracting. It's the same video. It might be out of sync on the left, that's on the right, but you can see it zoomed in a bit and actually contracting. And so that's a real cow muscle cell, a myocyte, a muscle, a cell that was grown in the lab. And so now we're trying to grow those on skeletal, on spinach leaves. And so what you see here on the left is an image of all these cells, and the cells are shown, the blue dots, the blue circles, essentially are the nuclei. The green is a structural protein that's found inside the cells. And so when you see a lot of green and blue on the left, that means you get a lot of cells. On the right, we used a different green marker. This green marker tells us if they're actually muscle cells. And so after the cells proliferate, after they grow, then we turn them into muscle cells. And so what you see on the right are those cells starting to turn into muscle cells, right? And what you can see are some cells that are muscle cells that have the green, the blue dots again with the green, and some cells that haven't turned into muscle yet, and those are the blue dots without any green near them. We've also used other scaffolds. For example, lettuce. Here's an image of lettuce, and I'll just go through a couple of these quickly. Jackfruit. We've also grown these cells on jackfruit. We've grown them on broccoli and the broccoli florets, the tips of broccoli. Our eventual goal is to make this bioreactor where we can input the cells, which I showed you earlier are actually contracting, and add them together with this decellularized scaffold, and then create meat at the end of the process. And so that is kind of summarized in this slide here. But there are many problems that are still limiting the field. There's, simple things like the technical acuity required for this. Right now, you pretty much need a biology degree to do this type of work. It's very expensive to grow the meat, whether we're talking about the cells or the media, the scaffold. It's labor intensive, and that costs money. We don't know if the consumer will accept it. We don't know the regulatory path. That's still up in the air. How is the USDA and the FDA going to work together on this process? And what are we doing next? The take-home message from this part of my talk, really, in this entire talk that I gave, at least, is that we need to go beyond the engineering. I'm an engineer, but this problem takes much, much more than engineering. So we need to think about social scientists. We need to work closely with social scientists, food scientists, environmental scientists, political science, a whole long list of people. We also want to involve the farmers and the ranchers. We don't want to put them out of a livelihood, right? So we've got to think about that there. The bottom line is we want to work with anybody who wants to make the world a better place. And so this on the right hand is a little schematic of what we're trying to do. So finally, I've been very fortunate to collaborate with a lot of folks at a lot of different institutions. And it takes an entire group, not just an individual. I am, honored to be able to present this on behalf of all my colleagues. Thank you for your time. Victoria, back over to you.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating. And now we're going to move from science to art and speak with filmmaker Liz Marshall, whose latest film, Meet, M-E-A-T, The Future, is about this very topic. Welcome, Liz. You are muted. Oh, there. Good.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to do a screen share here. Hope it's working. Is that working?
It's working beautifully.
Can you see it? Okay, perfect. So this is my latest film. Hello, everyone. I'm coming to you from Canada's West Coast, the unceded territory of the Sechelle and the Squamish peoples, where I'm privileged to be working and living right now. And this is my latest film. It's called Meet the Future. So we've just got a screen grab here from the website, which is meetthefuture.com. It's a film that has been a labor of love since 2016. And, I believe that we are at the brink of a new era in so many ways. It's a multifaceted issue. It's intersectional. It brings together all the things that I'm passionate about as a human being, as a filmmaker, as an artist: animal rights, environmental justice, and human health and human rights, and planetary hope and solutions. I will do another screen share now to talk about my relationship to this film, which is a 5-year project so far. So I'll start by saying that, I've been a filmmaker for over 2 decades. I've had the privilege of traveling the world many times and witnessing all kinds of incredible and heartbreaking stories, and meeting some incredible change makers. And what happened for me is that after the success of The Ghosts in Our Machine, which I hope you've seen. If you haven't, check it out. It had a wonderful global impact campaign associated with it, and a lot of exposure about the question of animal sentience. And it's not a question, it's a reality, it's truth. And it was about using the powerful platform of documentary to be a vehicle to communicate with people globally and to be a bridge builder. Documentaries are powerful platforms to unveil new ideas and to motivate social change. And so after spending, probably 5 years of my life very committed to that film, I was really looking for a story that was solution focused and that was viable and that was active and unfolding. And, The Ghosts in Our Machine is a consciousness raising film about a big moral issue and question, but Meet the Future is about a revolution that is underway. It's not science fiction anymore, it's reality. And I have this quote up here by Winston Churchill, because if you haven't already, read that quote or seen it in the zeitgeist, it's often cited as, the sort of this prophetic statement that was made in 1932. And here we are, all these years later, decades later, and this the birth of this industry, which is what Meet the Future is about, is actually, it has proliferated around the globe. There are pioneers on every continent. There are investors all over the globe. And this is this film is about an idea whose time has come. So meat harvested from animal cells will transform the food system. Singapore is the first country in the world to regulate cultured meat. So people in Singapore can actually eat it, purchase it, and eat it. Meet the Future focuses in a sort of laser focused way on the entry point of one startup company. And so back in 2016, I was really looking for that next big idea to wrap a film around. And I was lucky to be able to secure the necessary behind the scenes access that is required to tell these stories with a company called Memphis Meats. And they've recently rebranded as Upside Foods. And here's a quote from them. Now, as a filmmaker, of course, when you commit to these stories, there's no way that you can predict how that story will unfold. So therefore, it becomes a big risk for the film industry, broadcasters and funders to invest in something that could, evaporate. But what happened is that this story with Upside Foods actually, there was tremendous momentum, and we were lucky to have that access and to be able to chart and map the rapid progression of this company as an entry point to represent the birth of an industry globally. So we aim to make meat that is better for humans and animals and will at scale produce less waste and dramatically fewer greenhouse gas emissions. We believe that the planet will be the ultimate beneficiary. So the film's been getting around, and we've got a big, huge announcement coming in a few weeks. So please follow us. And I'm sorry I can't let you know the juicy details today, but there are very juicy details coming up. And I would like to talk about the underpinnings, the morals, the social, ethical underpinnings as to why I focused on this film, this story, why I made this film. So, like I said when I started talking, we are at the edge of a we are, there is a paradigm shift taking place in the world. From a climate emergency perspective, we need solutions that are viable, and we need them now. We can't wait, 50 years. We need to really move quickly to solve some of the greatest issues that we're all facing. Dangerous weather patterns, rising sea levels, methane. I mean, it's, deforestation, it goes on and on. So animal agriculture occupies nearly half of the world's land surface. And, what is exciting about the advent and the birth of this industry is that it could solve, and you'll notice that I said it could. Obviously, we can't make any giant claims here because this doesn't exist fully at scale yet. It's still something that is underway. But it could solve some of the greatest issues of our times. And that's what interests me about it from a social, political, and ethical, moral standpoint. So I'll just read something here that cultivated beef at scale is estimated to reduce land use by more than 95%, climate change emissions by 74 to 87%, and nutrient pollution by 94%. That's a game changer if, in fact, this does get off the ground at scale and becomes the new normal. So I'll just wind down by saying that Meet the Future is a journey. It's character-driven. It explores the moral and personal underpinnings. It follows pioneers over 5 years. And so that you could really humanize this subject matter. Otherwise, you know, it's really a science or business story. I'm not a science or business storyteller, but this film, of course, is about all of that. It brings together everything. It brings together issues of, you know, animal, environmental, and human justice issues, and it brings together an exciting business story and an exciting, you know, food technology and science story that is helping to change the world. So that's my presentation, and thank you. Let me just get out of this sharing mode. There we go.
Thank you so much, Liz Marshall. I cannot recommend your films highly enough. They are beautiful and they are powerful. May we all be both of those things. So now it is my pleasure to introduce John Sumbomatsu. He is a PhD. We said that before. He's the editor of Critical Theory and Animal Liberation. Dr. Sanbonmatsu, we'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Victoria. So I want to begin by thanking Jen Waglinski, who has organized the VegFest with that group of volunteers. So everybody maybe can applaud out in virtual land. And I want to say I'm really delighted to be on a panel with such people. I mean, I admire the work that everybody is doing here. Glenn and I are former colleagues, my friend Glenn, and I really enjoyed your presentation, Glenn. Liz did a fantastic job on her last film, Ghosts in Our Machine, which I'm really looking forward to. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing that new film. And finally, Victoria Moran, a very important voice in our movement. So anyway, I'm delighted to be here. I am, of course, taking the contrarian view on this panel. I'm happy to do it. I am the editor and curator of Clean Meat Hoax website. So I'm going to be going in and out of screen share. It might be a little annoying to people, but I like to do that. So let me just begin just a couple of quick slides here. Hopefully you are seeing my slideshow. If not, someone will speak up, right, Victoria? So basically, my comments are around this theme, why cellular meats won't end animal agriculture, at least as it's developing right now. And most of my remarks, or many of them, are taken more or less from our website, cleanmeathoax.com. And there are over a dozen of us, critical animal studies people, so scholars and activists in animal advocacy, who are trying to raise some concerns about this technology, which has generally not been greeted skeptically enough in our view. So this of course is the problem, and I appreciate the eloquent remarks of my colleague, former colleague Glenn, and then also Liz in laying out the problem. I mean, essentially we have this system which I and others have called speciesism. It's a mode of producing human life organized around the control and exploitation and killing of other beings. And within this structure is the capitalist world system. And as a result of this mode of production, we're at a point where we're destroying the entire ecosystem, as the other panelists pointed out, really and truly undermining the conditions for all life on Earth. Now, the animal agriculture and fisheries industries the destruction that they are wreaking on the environment is much worse than climate change, which is itself, as you pointed out, Glenn, one of the artifacts, partly an artifact of animal agriculture. But in terms of biodiversity loss, resource depletion, and mass extinction, it's really our violence against animals that's the problem. Let me stop there. I'll stop sharing that for just a second. So, now I wish that cellular meat was the magic bullet that would solve this problem, but I don't feel that it is. Otherwise, I'd be completely on board with it. I'm not attached to labels like vegan or whatnot. I'm in favor of animal justice. But at best, in my view, and I certainly could be wrong, but in my view, cultivated or cellular meats, at best, will reduce the rate of expansion of live animal meat consumption. They will not replace meat from conventionally raised animals anytime soon, if ever, not unless our attitudes and behavior towards animals as such, those attitudes are challenged. And that is a task of the animal advocacy movement, not the technologists who are not challenging that at all. So that's why we're here. We're here today because there's this crisis, and I describe this crisis as a legitimation crisis. Let me just share my screen again with you all. So these problems in animal agriculture and the fisheries industry have led to a breakdown of our mode of justifying this mass violence and exploitation, hence legitimation crisis, right? We see this in a variety of forms throughout the culture. Back in 2012, New York Times organized a contest inviting readers to explain why it was ethical to eat meat. Right? Since then, locavorism has taken off in the wake of Michael Pollan's book, The Omnivore's Dilemma. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of books promoting so-called humane meat, ethical meat, sustainable agriculture, animal agriculture, and so on. The Whole Foods Corporation has, as among other organizations, but particularly Whole Foods, has capitalized on this mania for so-called sustainable and so-called humane meat. Bruce Friedrich of the Good Food Institute, who I'll be mentioning in a moment, was one of the principals who was instrumental within the animal welfare movement to promote the so-called humane killing and the myth of a humane form of animal agriculture. And it's these same people who are at the center of this effort to lobby for what is now called clean meat or cellular meat. Let me just pause there for just a moment. So basically, because of this legitimation crisis, society at large and the meat industry are, everyone's doing everything they can to avoid dismantling the system. And in my view, cellular meat is part of this effort. I know that's paradoxical, but I'm going to explain why. Now, in theory, cellular meat could have been part of a wider movement strategy to lay the animal economy to rest. However, because the effort is being run by entrepreneurial capitalists in collusion with the biggest institutional players in the meat industry, it's a problem. According to a new report released, I think just this week, but this month anyway, by McKinsey & Company, one of the world's largest management consulting firms, the best guess right now is that a decade from now, if all goes according to plan, a decade from now, cellular meats will replace, quote, 0.5% of the total market in meat. That's if all the rosy predictions hold. In 10 years, cellular meat will replace 0.5% of the total market in meat. That means that between now and then, 9 and 27 trillion animals will die violently at human hands in the meanwhile. because we're killing between 1 and 3 trillion marine animals and up to 60 billion land animals every single year. Now, as an animal advocate, I find that unacceptable. And in my view, whatever else the cellular meat juggernaut is, it is not a strategy for overcoming the system of human violence against animals. So I don't think this is going to ultimately help the animals very much. And the reason why is that cellular meats are being folded into a strategy to preserve the meat economy. It's very important that we understand that. I'd like to show a brief clip actually from Liz's film, Meet the Future, which I'm really looking forward to seeing. It looks like a beautifully made movie. This is a 30-second clip I'm going to show you of Uma Valetti of Memphis Meats. You just explained, Liz, that it's now Upside Foods. But when he was with Memphis Meats, co-founder of that, explaining why he signed a letter of agreement with the largest meat trade organization. So let me just play that for you. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing my screen again. Thanks for your patience. Okay, so Uma Valetti, again, the co-founder and CEO of Memphis Meats, and here's his signature with Barry Carpenter, president and CEO of the North American Meat Institute. So I just want to play 30 seconds of his explanation of why he did this.
I'm signing a letter with the largest meat trade association in the world. Felt like the right thing to do. We are going to bring everybody under this tent. The meat industry knows that they can't meet the demand. If the demand for meat is going to double by 2050, there is no method of production at their disposal now that would satisfy that hunger for meat.
Okay, so Valetti is saying in this passage that he wants to bring everybody under this tent, okay? Now, what that means in practice is creating a symbiotic relationship between the existing meat industry and the new cellular meat industry. And the reason for this is because both are needed in order to meet future demand. This is not going to replace conventional animal agriculture. So this long-term strategy of the meat and animal industry is to preserve a so-called diverse protein portfolio that will be made up of industrially, factory farmed animals, animals from so-called humane, smaller farms or medium-sized organic farms, fish and other marine animals taken from the oceans, possibly trillions of insects who, by the way, are conscious, quite amazing, extraordinary beings. Up to trillions of insects will be, quote, harvested for their protein. Plant-based foods are part of this mix, and then finally meat grown synthetically from cell cultures. Matthew Walker, managing director at S2G Ventures, a high-tech venture capitalist firm investing in alternative proteins, has said, quote, "We're taking a yes and as opposed to an either or approach to the space. You will have animal-based meat, plant-based meat, and you will have hybrids." Now, in 2019, Renee Vassilos, an agricultural economist with the Banyan Innovation Group, told attendees at the National Institute for Animal Agriculture, quote, "And alternative proteins from insects to legumes to cell cultures are not something to view as a replacement for animal proteins, but as just another competitor in a huge global protein market." And we find this confirmed in various places in the industry. Now, if you look at this, the bottom there, this quote, I found this in the Tri-State Livestock News a couple of years ago. I just want to draw attention to the headline, how alternative proteins can support the animal agriculture industry. This is a really, really crucial point. All right, let me stop that for a moment. So right now, already some of the biggest killers of animals on the planet are investing heavily in the alternative protein sector. Tyson Foods has invested in the cellular meat startups of Upside Foods and Future Meats. PHW Gruppe Lumen, the German company, which is the largest killer of chickens in Europe, 350 million chickens a year, has invested in super meats. I mentioned Bruce Friedrich. He himself And he is, one of the most important people who's created this lobby for this new untested technology, has said, quote, that he wants to take ethics off the table. That's a direct quotation. He wants to take ethics off the table in our conversations about meat and animals. And he has made it clear, and I can give you the quotes later if we have time. He's made it clear that that cellular meat poses no threat, he has said, no threat whatsoever to regenerative animal agriculture or the so-called humane meat market. In other words, I've spoken to Bruce Friedrich about this a couple of years ago. In the world that he foresees, millions or billions of animals will continue to be killed for food. Now, Friedrich, of course, does argue and believe, perhaps, that this technology will at least replace factory farming, right? Unfortunately, though, the agribusiness interests themselves have made clear that they have no intention of getting rid of conventional animal agriculture, right? And the reason is simply because otherwise they can't meet demand. And one of the problems, I could talk about this if we have time later, is the way that the cellular meat space has developed is it's reinforcing meat culture as a whole by repeating over and over again that meat, meaning animal flesh, is crucial to the human diet. It's a great source of nutrition. We love our meat. We need our meat, none of which is true. Okay, none of which is true. We did not need an alternative. We didn't need to grow food in a vat. There have been many plant-based, delicious alternatives, nutritious alternatives for thousands of years. But in any event, Cargill, for example, the largest agribusiness company in the world, and one of the most destructive, has said, quote, our goal is to provide a complete basket of goods to our customers, and we will do this by growing our traditional protein business, meaning factory farming, as well as entering into new proteins and investing in innovative alternatives. At Cargill, we recognize that meat is a core part of consumer diets and central to many cultures and traditions. Our traditional proteins, they mean from live animals, as well as new innovations like cultured meats, are both necessary to meet that demand. And in the same press release where Cargill was explaining it's investing in these new technologies, the press release emphasized that Cargill has recently invested $600 million in factory farming. New investment. And it says that it's explicitly said that the reason they invested the $600 million is to underscore, this is a quote, to underscore Cargill's overarching commitment to animal protein. Now, does that sound to you like Cargill is planning to wind down its mass killing of animals anytime soon? There's simply no evidence that the meat companies are planning to get out of the business of exploiting and killing animals. To bring the cellular meat thing up to scale, as we keep talking about, when will that be? How many decades from now? Last year, A.T. Kearney, the consulting firm, gave the best case scenario. It said that in 20 years from now, basically the total number of animals being killed will be about the same, possibly a little less than are being killed today. That's in 20 years. Now remember what McKinsey said, that in 9 years, this new technology, if it goes well, will account for 0.5% of the meat economy. So basically, at the same time, we find cellular meat proponents deliberately reinforcing meat culture and this myth that we have to keep eating flesh. At the very moment, ironically, right, that veganism and plant-based foods are finally becoming mainstream. At the very moment when people are finally opening up to the idea that plant-based food, which by the way, there's so many uncertainties, Glenn, as you were pointing out about this new technology, in none of the studies that I've seen do even the rosiest projections of cellular meat come close to the ecological savings of plant-based foods. Plant-based agriculture is the most ecologically sustainable way to produce food, protein, calories for human beings. Cellular meats will certainly be better than live animals, but not as good as plant-based foods. So to conclude, and I'm sorry to go on a little long, from my perspective, at any rate, the only viable solution to the problems that we face is to really challenge what I call human species right, which is this idea that we have a right to dominate, exploit, and kill other beings. And that has to be really central. Unfortunately, that idea is not being made central by this lobby. In fact, it's being de-emphasized. There's always this talk about how the health benefits of cellular meat, the ecological benefits. The animals, well, they're kind of mentioned, but they're not central because who cares after all? There are only trillions of animals we're killing. So anyway, thank you for listening to my provocative remarks, and now I turn it back to the chair.
Thanks to everyone. I think you're all provocative. You could take that act on the road, the provocative trio. So we've gone a bit over. We have 10 minutes and 5 questions so far. So could I get a show of hands on the panelists if we run over up to about 10 minutes? Are you all okay with that? Okay, cool. All right. Then I'm going to ask the last question first. This is for John because it does relate to what you've been talking about. This comes from Paulina, and she says, there have been vegetarians since Pythagoras, if not Eden, but most people still eat meat. How can we convince people to care when they just don't?
Absolutely. And I want to say, I want to practice a little humility here and say, I don't have the magic bullet myself. I don't have a strategy for changing this. And I understand that's why a lot of animal advocates are drawn to this new technology, because they think that, as Paulina points out, yeah, I mean, since Pythagoras, they've been vegetarians. As I said, if this whole thing was being unfolded within a robust animal rights movement that was really getting at what I see to be the core psychological and cultural issues, then I might be in favor of it. But as it is, I'm really concerned that it's already being co-opted by corporate agribusiness, and that it's reinforcing the idea that we have to keep eating animals forever, which is just silly. But anyway, to grant the point, yeah, I have some ideas for strategy, but that would take another hour to talk about.
Okay. Liz or Glenn, does either of you want to comment on that question? Okay, Liz.
I agree tenfold with the question, because, as someone that has also traveled the globe extensively for my work over the decades, the vast majority of our species consumes animal protein, often on a daily basis. It is very complex subject matter, and I don't think it's helpful to have black and white thinking around this. I think that we need all tactics. I think we need to, I agree with the ethics, John. I'm vegan myself. But I also agree with the argument and the critique of capitalism, the levers of capitalism creating, arguably transformation and paradigm shift and disruption is a fascinating angle, which is what Meet the Future, the film, is all about. And so I've been very steeped and immersed in this, the emergence and the questions of this, the birth of this industry for about 5 years. And so there's tons of questions, and I think that's great. And that is the purpose of a film, is to be that platform for discussion and debate and bridge building. And that's really who I am, and that's what motivates me. But ultimately, I'm a pragmatist. I don't believe in the utopian. We don't have time for a utopian aspiration of a vegan world. It's not going to happen in the next 10 years. And 2050, everyone's talking about 2050 as this, benchmark, but it's actually, we got to move faster. Everything is an emergency right now. If you believe it's not, then please read up on climate science. And if you're coming at it solely from the perspective of animal exploitation and wanting to save animals, that is an emergency. Roughly 70 billion land animals are slaughtered annually for their flesh. And the suffering is just unbearable. So, and then from a human health zoonotic disease perspective, we need transformation within the actual system of conventional animal agriculture. So I would argue that these innovators and pioneers are pragmatists who are using their skills to disrupt and transform a system that needs repair, that needs transformation, and that isn't going anywhere anytime soon. I agree with that part. But I think that industrial animal agriculture can be radically revolutionized and changed within our lifetime. And I think that's really the crux of the argument here, is whether or not you believe that it should be transformed or completely dismantled, based on the fact that most people in the world eat meat.
Do you,
Yeah,
you
just like
did it-
to,
Go ahead, Glenn.
I was just saying, like, you know, I want to echo what Liz was just saying, and, you know, also thank Liz and John for outstanding presentations and, you know, bringing up a lot of very, you know, valid points. The question, you know, how do we teach, you know, people to care is a great question. There's much, much more than just the topic we're talking about, right? I mean, that's one of our biggest problems, I think, in our world today. But bringing the focus to, you know, animal agriculture, John and I know from our institution that we were at together, there's theory and practice. And I agree, you know, with John's theory, you know, but practically, you know, as Liz said, I think anything we can do to decrease our reliance on animal agriculture, let's get started right now, and let's educate people, and let's hope that you know, momentum continues to pick up and continues to swing. You know, Paul Shapiro in his book says, you know, we've tried to convert everybody to, you know, vegetarians and vegans. It just does, you know, it just hasn't worked. And so, you know, being practical, let's do all we can to decrease our reliance as much as we can on animal agriculture.
Okay,
I probably can't get another word in there.
Well, let me ask you another question that's for you, and then you can bring your rebuttal in with this one as well. So this comes from Bob, specifically for you, and he is saying, I don't understand the capitalism connection. I lived for a time in Maoist China, and I can tell you I would not want to have been a pig or chicken or even a cat or dog there.
Yeah, amen, brother. Yes, I agree with that, certainly. I mean, look, I teach a 7-week class on capitalism, you know, at the undergraduate level, and we only scratch the surface of the topic. So I suggest Bob take the class, but I can't go into really. And if you go to our website, cleanmeathoax.com, at least you can see critiques, we make the connection there between this technology and capitalism and why we should be a little bit suspicious of it. Just very, very briefly, I just want to say, I respectfully disagree with this framing of pragmatism.
We're not hearing you well, John. Maybe a little closer to your mic.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Better, yes.
Sorry, I was just saying on this dichotomy between the utopians and the pragmatists, I really reject that. I mean, you know, we can get into the abolitionist movement against slavery, you know, and the pragmatists who wanted to reform slavery and those who said, no, it's just unacceptable. But I guess what I was trying to say actually in my remarks is that this isn't a practical strategy. That the cellular meat stuff, it's this untried technology that is decades away from replacing the system. Whereas actually, if we all got on the same page and began advocating for animal justice and a plant-based economy and so on, we could make progress. And actually, it occurred to me about the Pythagoras stuff. There are more vegetarians and vegans today in America, right? Just in the last 10 years, it's grown like 3,000%. So that's what I mean. It's like snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, to be pushing this technology when there's been enormous progress on the vegan front. That's all, I guess. I have other things, but I'm monopolizing.
No, you guys are all wonderful. Let's see. Now, Marlene has 2 questions for Glenn, and I'll give them to you all at once. The first is, will people of all economic levels be able to afford cultured meat? And the second is, can cultured meat be made without growth hormones?
So thank you for those questions. Really important questions, right? I think both of them are very, very important in terms of the economic levels. That's something that we need to, you know, consider as, you know, we develop what I think is really a new industry. And so, you know, we're talking a little bit about capitalism here. You know, think about this new industry, lab-grown meats, cellular meats, whatever you want to call it. We have the opportunity, and that's part of the reason why at the end of my talk, I said we need to talk to sociologists. How do we ensure that everybody can benefit from this new industry? Can we have a new economic model so that everybody benefits? Can we bring the cost of this down so that people can actually grow meat in their kitchen regardless of economical status? Now, it's not easy, and I don't have the solutions, right? But we need to make sure that we involve others who can help enable that solution. So my hope is the answer is yes. Right now, the answer is no. And as John points out, it's going to be a while before this becomes mainstream. In regards to removing the growth factors, we can in the hormones, we can remove some of the growth hormones. We can replace them with basically proteins that are grown in plants, and so we can get rid of the animal that way. But there are the building blocks that are needed for our cells and the tissue to grow, and so we can't replace the hormones, or depending on your definition of exactly if you're talking about hormones themselves or growth factors. We can't replace the growth factors, get rid of them altogether, but what we can do is produce those growth factors in theory in plants and get rid of the animal that produces those growth factors.
Thank you. Now we have a question from Kathy. She says, it's a long way away, but I'm thinking about lab meat as a compassionate way to feed companion animals. If we're able to reduce dairy, then there will thankfully be fewer calves sent to become pet food. I wonder if companion animal foods might achieve government approval before human trials. Glenn or Liz?
Just to start off, there are some companies right now in the lab-grown meat, the cellular agriculture industry that are focused on that, on companion animal food. And so I do think that there is a significant opportunity there.
Cool. Because I've had cats. And, it's hard to open those little cans once you awaken to not wanting to eat animal foods yourself.
If I could just want to say, Liz, I don't know if you wanted to add anything, but this is actually an application of the technology that I support. I mean, producing food, because I had a student who did at WPI where I teach, who looked at the amount of the number of animals who are killed to feed cats and dogs. And by the way, if you have a cat, if you have a dog, dog does not have to eat animal products. Dogs are omnivores like us, they can be vegan. But in any event, cats are obligate carnivores, right? But if you add up all the number of animals that are killed to feed our cats and dogs, it would be like the 5th largest country in the world in terms of meat consumption. It is a huge, huge, huge issue. And so I just want to say, because everyone thinks I'm probably a bad person on this panel, but I do support this technology for our companion animals.
Thank you.
Let me just say, I know John well, and he is a good person.
We all know
Thanks.
that. So here's a talk about provocative. This comes from Jennifer. Would the panelists eat cultured meat? Why or why not? We'll just go around. We'll start with you, John, Liz, and Glenn.
When I was preparing for this panel, my secret question was for Glenn. I want to know what Glenn. Kind of interesting is here we are at the New England VegFest. Why are we talking about this exactly? I mean, I know why. It's kind of rhetorical, but the people who are most enthusiastic about this technology, other than the entrepreneurs, are vegans and vegetarians who are the least likely to want it, right? They want everyone else to have it. And so I'm curious, Glenn, I don't think you're a vegan. I'd be curious to know whether you're eager to replace your animal products with this kind of animal product or cell product, because personally, it doesn't appeal to me, and I'm not planning to get any of it.
I'll let Liz go first, and then I'll go.
Sure. In following the story over 5 years, I tried it twice. You know, so, and I have a water bottle and a hoodie that says first bite. So I'm part of this, you know, elite little tiny club that basically it's like going to the moon. I didn't have any, so the reason I tried it as a vegan is for my work, but also more than that, obviously, because I wouldn't eat meat otherwise at all. But I didn't have any moral conflict around it. And so I've done a lot of international press about the film, and every journalist asked me the same question. It became sort of predictable that I would get this question. So would I integrate this into my, you know, regular life diet when it's available to consumers? And the answer is 99.9% no. And the reason I have that tiny fraction is because if it, you know, ended up on my plate at someone's house, barbecue, whatever, I would, it's not a moral dilemma for me to taste it again or to have it at a dinner party or something like that. But I don't need to eat meat. I choose to not eat meat for ethical reasons. And I continue to live that way, you know, happily. So, and it's my daily form of activism. It's the strongest daily practical way to be an activist. As a filmmaker, that's also an active way that I'm an activist. So that's my long answer.
That was a lovely long answer. Thank you so much. And Glenn, we've been waiting with bated breath because you have been baited.
I would definitely, without a doubt, eat cultured meat. And, you know, I think, you know, John's question, you know, in terms of going back, you know, if we really want to cut back on animal agriculture, if we really want to, you know, cut back on the destruction of animal agriculture in regards to our environment, whether it's the land, the water, you know, any of those, we really need to attract the non-vegans, the non-vegetarians, and we really need to come up with a substitute for them, right? Because the fact of the matter is, vegetarians and vegans are not, you know, destroying our environment by partaking in animal agriculture, right? When I eat meat, which is much less than it was, you know, 10, 20 years ago, then yes, I am partaking in that. And so how do we come up with a solution for the meat eaters? Because if we want to save our environment, you know, if we want to decrease in the number of, you know, factory farms, we really need to find an alternative for the meat eaters, right? And so, you know, John, to your point, that's who we've got to, you know, we've got to target. And I hope we do. I'm a huge supporter of the Impossible Burger, you know, Impossible Meat Beyond Burger, Beyond Meat, made meatloaf with it before. You know, it's, you know, is it the same? No. Is it close? Yes. You know, and is it a great substitute? Yes. And, you know, love to see both of those, you know, continue to take off.
I'd like to just say one, I'm in a very unique position with this film because it's had a huge exposure in Canada, very high profile exposure, and we're right now strategizing for our international release with news coming soon. So I've had a lot of opportunity to hear from meat eaters who've watched the film. And basically, overall, the consensus, I would say, is that so many of them want to try it. And the uniqueness of a film is that it really serves a purpose in society to help educate the masses and to be that platform for debate and discussion and consciousness raising. So I would argue with what you said, John. I think that meat eaters, the more that they understand what this is and that it's available and affordable and convenient for them to purchase, I think more and more people will be interested.
And if I may just comment on that, the reason I disagree is, I mean, you can look at, Glenn, you mentioned Paul Shapiro, and I have a lot of problems with Shapiro as well as with Bruce and Friedrich and Wayne Pacelli and these guys, because these were the people the ones who say that we failed, the movement failed, are the ones who failed the movement. I mean, these are the people who are actually steering the movement. They failed actually by, claiming that we needed to move to, humane, animal welfare oriented policies, and that was their pragmatic solution, which failed, because, you can't wean a nation of alcoholics off of alcohol by offering them finer bourbon and scotch, artisanal beef. And so, when we talk about, quote, meat eaters, I was a meat eater. A meat eater isn't something like in the genes, right? It's something that it's part of our cultural identity, and therefore it can be changed. There used to be slavers in this country. Now there aren't slavers anymore. So, and I know we're on the same, I think, that we're on the same page. We want the right things. I mean, the same things here, but again, I just don't, I think it's really a mistake for our movement, and I'm speaking to animal advocates here and vegans, I think it's a mistake for us to be paying so much attention to the cellular meat stuff. This is a $1 billion juggernaut. It's going to go on regardless. Our job, as I see it in the animal advocacy movement, is to change. It's to make people care. It's what you were saying, Glenn. That is our job. I'm not going to pin my hopes to this technology. I don't think people should do that.
Thank you. I don't know if the convener gets to answer Jennifer's question, but I wanted to answer this one too, because it reminded me when I first was looking at veganism a very, very long time ago, and the late Jay Dinshaw, founder of the American Vegan Society, talked about 6 reasons why people would go vegan. We know about 3 and talk about them all the time: ethics, health, environment. But he also added spirituality, economics, and aesthetics. And it was that last one, the aesthetics one, that came up for me, why I just don't think I could eat it. I remember early, even before I was vegan, I was just vegetarian, and I was so excited that a restaurant had on its menu veggie burger. It was like, woohoo. Well, it was a hamburger with some kind of hamburger helper in it, and I took one bite, and it was just so aesthetically uncomfortable that I'm just not looking to do that again. So I'd love to go around and just ask each of our esteemed panelists, just for a close, just a minute or 2 minutes on what you want this audience to know and what you think is important going forward. We'll do it alphabetically. Glenn?
So I very much enjoyed being part of this panel. It's been fantastic. And I, very much respect and appreciate Liz and John's point of view and all that they, shared with us. In regards to, my closing message, I just go back to, I think a couple things. One, we need to teach people how to care, and care for each other and care for animals and care for others. That's so important. And, I hope that we can convince the meat eaters that, this is a substitute for them, because I think we need to, reduce our reliance on animal agriculture. And while, it'd be great if we could all just, if it was a binary thing and we just flip the switch and turn it tomorrow, it's probably not going to happen. And so, I want to keep on going towards doing what we can, in the practical sense, to reduce our reliance on animal agriculture.
Thank you so very much. Now, when I said alphabetical, I don't know if I meant first name or last name, so I'm going to go with last name. I'm going to go to Liz.
Yes, so thanks so much. It's great to meet you, John and Glenn, and So nice to see you again, Victoria. Your beautiful smile. Thanks for moderating, and hello to everyone listening to this. It's food for thought, literally. So I think, my message really is keep your mind open. I don't think it's helpful to have black and white thinking in our world as it currently is. We are, on the brink of a new era. We need solutions that are viable, that are underway, that will truly help us all, the animals, humans, and Mother Earth. We need to move quickly, and we need, things that we can trust, obviously. But keep your mind open. I think that, there are, in the toolkit, there are so many tactics, and one should not be rejected for one other sort of approach. We need to bridge build, and we need to work together, and we need to save the animals, and we need to save ourselves and this planet.
Thank you, Liz Marshall. And John, last word.
Yeah, so I want to echo my fellow panelists and thanking you all for your wonderful, thoughtful remarks. And again, Victoria, for being a great moderator, actually. It's not an easy job. You did a great job. Yeah, I guess just in closing, I would urge people to look at our website, cleanmeathoax.com. I agree, black and white thinking isn't helpful. But I don't think it's, I think what I see black and white thinking, where I see that is mostly in the proponents of this new technology, who never seem to admit that there are problems with it politically or culturally or spiritually. And so I just urge everyone who's watching this to look into this more carefully and not to just take it for granted. And the critiques that we raise on our website, I'm not sure. Time will tell whether they're valid or not, but I think that they are worth considering. So that's all I'll say. So thank you again, and thank you again, Jen, who just joined us.
Thank you all so much. And if you would like to keep up with our esteemed panelists, lizmars.com and clean-meathoax.com. Now, Glenn just sent me his department website, and it's very long. So for sharing audibly, I don't think that's going to work, but I'm sure that Jen, who has all the technology under control, will be able to put that somewhere that you can find it. And I am Main Street Vegan all over the place, and my website is mainstreetvegan.net. Thanks to everybody who presented, Jen and all of your team at New England VegFest for making this work so seamlessly. And thanks to everybody who's listening. We're all needed to get out there and change the world. All the best.